In 1991, the hands of the Doomsday clock had been moved as far away from midnight as it had been in its entire history. The fall of the Soviet Union gave much hope that the nuclear-armed countries of the world would begin to disarm, and that the threat of a nuclear holocaust would soon fade into a distant memory. MAD, or mutually assured destruction, was the formula that had kept the two great superpowers from launching a nuclear first strike against the other during the Cold War. Both had the capability to retaliate with a second strike that could annihilate the other. This was the status quo that many argued kept World War III from breaking out. The threat of a conflict leading to a nuclear suicide deterred both powers for nearly half a century. Some U.S. planners have long desired to escape the constraints of MAD and achieve U.S. nuclear primacy over its main nuclear competitors. Nuclear primacy is when a state has the ability to destroy a rival state with a nuclear first strike without the fear of a retaliatory strike. And despite popular belief, the U.S. is now on its way to accomplishing this goal. American nationalists believe this policy is beneficial to the U.S., and that it should have this power because only it can be trusted to be a force for good in the world. Opponents believe that a policy aimed at achieving nuclear primacy will actually increase the likelihood of an attack on the United States. Opponents also fear that unbridled American power will lead to foreign policymakers relying more on military force rather than diplomacy to achieve desired goals. While most Americans would feel comfortable in a world with U.S. nuclear primacy, the rest of the world would not, and would act militarily to counter this perceived threat. This is already manifesting itself in several distinct and very real threats. First, Russia, America's main nuclear competitor, is beginning to delegate nuclear responsibility to lower-level managers in order to challenge the new American policy. This is increasing Russia's response time, but it is also increasing the likelihood of an accidental nuclear launch. Nuclear primacy can only protect a state if that state launches first, so the risk to the U.S. from an accidental launch is actually increasing. Accidental launches had almost occurred several times during the Cold War. Luckily, these incidents were diffused by upper-level Russian managers before an accident led to catastrophe. So the dangers of lower-level managers, mixed with antiquating equipment and radar, are exponentially increasing the nuclear threat risk to America, and thereby the world. If the U.S. were attacked, it would most certainly respond, and the nuclear holocaust that would ensue might have the potential to end life on Earth as we know it. The second threat is coming from two non-conventional methods of delivery, mainly the suitcase bomb and space-based weaponry. As mentioned earlier, Russia is desperately trying to increase its level of deterrence in the face of a deteriorating nuclear program. As a result, Russia has been moving around its mobile nuclear missiles more often in order to throw off targeting by U.S. forces. This increases the likelihood of one of these mobile nuclear missiles being captured by terrorist elements that are loyal to organizations like Al-Qaeda. This is the most likely scenario of how a terrorist organization could obtain a nuclear weapon. A weapon obtained in such a manner could easily appear in a suitcase on the streets of a major American or European city. Last week, China used one of its new weapon systems to shoot down an aging Chinese satellite in low orbit. This was a clear demonstration to the United States that China is able to and willing if necessary to challenge them militarily. This is partially a result of the U.S. rejection of agreements on space arms control. The Bush administration says that it not only has the right to weaponize space, but also by means of de facto control says that space supremacy is now the official policy of the United States government, as Weekly Standard writer Michael Goldfarb approvingly put it. Opponents fear that this policy of space supremacy is opening a Pandora's box of destructive possibilities. A weaponized space system could rain destruction upon the Earth in a matter of minutes or even seconds. A third threat comes from the wave of nuclear proliferation that has overtaken the world since the end of the Cold War. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was opened to signature in 1968. Since that time, 188 states have signed the treaty. 2 of the 8 confirmed nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, and 1 unconfirmed nuclear power, Israel, have never signed the treaty. The treaty can be summarized in 3 main points: non-proliferation, disarmament, and the right to peacefully use nuclear technology. The treaty says that states that are already nuclear powers must actively work towards disarmament, in exchange for states choosing not to develop a nuclear weapons program. Under the treaty, all states are allowed to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. Today, the Bush administration says that it's against nuclear proliferation, but this goes against both historical and current examples of the U.S. being either directly involved in or complacent with the proliferation of nuclear materials. During the Cold War, the U.S. had a program known as Atoms for Peace. This experimental program was unveiled in 1953 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The general concept behind the program was that the United States would distribute nuclear technology to other nations in exchange for assurances that these countries would not build nuclear weapons. America and Canada supplied India for years with nuclear materials through this program, but they were shocked when the Indians exploded their first nuclear weapon in 1974. They realized that this policy had backfired, yet there was very little that they could do to stop it. In March 2006, the Bush administration went one step further by legitimizing India's possession of nuclear weapons formally by signing a nuclear deal with that country. In the agreement, the U.S. agreed to supply India with nuclear material for civilian use. Opponents in Congress say that this deal sets a bad precedent of openly supporting a country that has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the fear being it will only encourage further proliferation around the world. North Korea is the newest member of the nuclear club, and some believe that Iran is not far behind. Iran has often been cited as being the foremost supporter of terror around the world, yet this fact alone does not explain the rationale behind Iran's alleged nuclear ambitions. After seeing the U.S. back off of North Korea once it had acquired a nuclear weapon, officials in Tehran may now believe that a nuclear weapon may be the only way to deter an American attack or invasion. Across the board, from global warming to nuclear weapons, the risks of an unprecedented disaster are shadowing human civilization. This does not mean that the fates of humans are already written in stone. Scientists claim that if action is taken soon, the more apocalyptical predictions can be avoided. And if nations can work together to implement new international disarmament treaties while reinforcing ones already on the books, the threat of a nuclear war or accidental launch can be avoided as well. But right now, the clock is ticking for humanity, and unlike in the Cinderella story, when the Doomsday clock strikes midnight, it's all over. This report was written by Boyd Delonzo.